There's a hush in the air tonight, a stillness that feels almost alive, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Can you feel it? The weight of something ancient, something stirring in the shadows, just beyond the edge of your imagination. Whether you're curled up in bed or settling into your favorite chair, we're so glad you're here to join us on this journey into the heart of Middle-earth's most haunting tales. And we'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Is the moon high in your sky, or are you wrapped in the quiet of the early hours? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories make this adventure all the richer. Picture this, a vast, frozen wasteland stretching endlessly under a sky choked with stars. The wind howls like a wounded beast, and the ice groans beneath the feet of a weary people. This is the Helkaraxet, the grinding ice, where Finglefin, High King of the Noldor, stands resolute. His cloak billows in the bitter wind, his breath a ghostly mist in the frigid air. Behind him, his people exhausted, frostbitten, but unbroken wait for his command. They've crossed an entire world to escape the darkness, only to find it waiting for them here, in the form of distant howls that twist through the night. Those are no ordinary wolves. They belong to Morgoth, the enemy, the shadow that has pursued them every step of this impossible journey. And now, the moment has come. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a blade. Every heartbeat is a drum roll, every breath a silent prayer. Fingelfin's hand rests on the hilt of his sword, not out of fear, but with the quiet certainty of a king who knows his next decision will echo through history. Will he lead his people into battle against the encroaching darkness, or will he find another path, one that requires even greater sacrifice? The fate of the Noldor hangs in the balance, and as the wind carries the scent of snow and steel, you can't help but lean in closer. This is more than a story. It's a legend woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth, a tale of courage, defiance, and the unyielding light of hope in the face of overwhelming shadow. So settle in, dear listener, and let the whispers of the past carry you away into the battle of the Lamoth, where heroes are forged and legends are born. Fingelfin's voice rises above the wind, sharp as the edge of a freshly honed blade. It carries across the frozen expanse, reaching every ear among his people, not with the warmth of comfort, but with the fire of purpose. We have crossed ice that would break lesser spirits, he declares, his words ringing with a quiet fury. We have endured betrayal, watched our kin abandon us to this merciless waste. But let it not be said that the house of Fingelfin fled when darkness came calling. A murmur runs through the crowd, like embers stirred back to life. Hands tighten around sword hilts. Bows are strung with slow, deliberate motions. The sting of Fëanor's treachery still burns, but now it fuels something fiercer than grief, the need to carve their own fate into the bones of this land. Then, movement at the edge of the camp. Scouts return, their faces grim, their breaths ragged. The enemy is near, not just scattered bands of orcs, but a host vast enough to blot out the horizon, their crude banners bearing the dread mark of Morgoth's lieutenants. The air grows heavier, thick with the scent of iron and oiled leather. Somewhere in the distance, a war horn sounds low and guttural, a challenge, a promise of blood. Fingelfin does not flinch. He turns to his warriors, his eyes alight with something that might be madness or might be the purest clarity. They think us broken, he says, so softly the wind nearly steals the words. Let us show them what broken things can do. And with that, the silence shatters. Swords are drawn, their blades catching the pale light like shards of frozen starlight. There are no more speeches, no grand proclamations, only the shared understanding that this is the moment they have been marching toward since the first step onto the ice. The time for vengeance is now, the time to reclaim what was stolen, to carve their names into legend, has come at last. And so, with the howling wind at their backs and the weight of centuries pressing down upon them, the Noldor advance. Not as refugees, not as exiles, but as a storm. The Noldor move like a single, shimmering blade being drawn from its sheath, each warrior falling into place with the precision of a centuries-old dance. Their armor, though dulled by the long march across the ice, still catches what little light filters through the heavy clouds, glinting like distant stars trapped in steel. At the forefront stands Fingon, Fingolfin's eldest, his fingers flexing around the hilt of his sword. There's a fire in his chest, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. The need to prove that his father's faith in him is not misplaced, that the blood of kings runs just as hot in his veins. A low rumble shakes the earth, distant at first, then swelling like thunder. The horizon darkens not with storm clouds, but with the writhing mass of Morgoth's horde. Orcs, their jagged weapons raised high, their voices a cacophony of snarls and shrieks, surge forward like a tide of filth. The stench of them rolls ahead, rancid sweat, rusted metal, the sour tang of fear. But the Noldor do not waver. They have crossed the Helkaraxet. They have endured the bite of frost and the weight of betrayal. This is just another shadow to cut through. Finglefin lifts his sword, and for a heartbeat, the world holds its breath. Then his voice rings out, clear and terrible, a sound that splits the sky. For Tyrion, for the light we were stolen from, the response is instant, a roar that shakes the very air as the elves charge, their feet pounding the frozen earth like a drumbeat of destiny. Steel meets steel in a deafening crash, the first blows landing with the force of a breaking storm. Fingon is a blur of motion, his blade carving through the ranks of orcs as if they were wheat before the scythe. Every strike is a testament, every parry a promise. He will not falter. The battle is chaos given form, a whirl of flashing blades, snapping bowstrings, and the guttural screams of the dying. Yet through it all, the Noldor fight with a grace that belies their fury, their movements precise, their resolve unshaken. They are not just warriors, they are artists, and this is their masterpiece written in blood and victory. The orcs, for all their numbers, begin to fray at the edges, their crude discipline no match for the refined wrath of the elves, and then, a shift, a ripple through the enemy lines as something pushes forward, something larger, darker. A Balrog, its whip of fire lashing the air, its shadow swallowing the light. The ground trembles beneath its hooves, and for the first time since the charge began, hesitation flickers through the Noldor ranks. But Fingon does not retreat. He tightens his grip on his sword, his jaw set. This is the moment. This is where legends are made. The clash of steel rings through the night like some terrible symphony, each strike a note in a song of survival. Fingon fights as if possessed, his sword arm never tiring, his movements a blur of silver and crimson. Orcs fall before him like wheat before the scythe, their crude armor no match for the skill of a prince of the Noldor. Yet for every foe he cuts down, 2 more seem to rise from the darkness, their yellowed teeth bared in snarls, their eyes glinting with malice. The ground beneath his feet grows slick with black blood, the stench of it thick enough to choke on, but he does not slow. He cannot. To his left, Finglefin duels the orc captain, a monstrous figure, taller than the rest, its jagged armor pieced together from the spoils of fallen warriors. Their blades meet again and again, sparks flying with each parry, each feint. The High King moves with the grace of a storm, his strikes precise, his footwork flawless. There is no hesitation in him, no doubt, only the cold certainty that this creature will die by his hand. With a sudden twist of his wrist, he finds an opening, his sword biting deep into the orc's side. The captain howls, stumbling back, but Finglefin does not relent. One final, sweeping arc, and the beast's head rolls into the trampled snow, its body collapsing like a felled tree. Yet even as the elves press forward, a ripple of unease spreads through their ranks. The howls that had haunted the edges of the battle grow louder now, closer, no longer distant threats, but promises. The air itself seems to shudder, heavy with something ancient, something hungry. Then, through the fray, a shadow moves, not the clumsy bulk of orcs, but something sleek, something that slinks between the fighting with unnatural grace. Wolves, but not the wolves of the wild, no. These are the fell creatures of Morgoth, their eyes burning like coals, their muzzles stained with old blood. At their head strides a figure wrapped in darkness, his armor blacker than the void between stars. Gothmog, lord of Balrogs. The ground trembles where he steps, the snow melting beneath him, steam rising in his wake. His whip uncoils like a living thing, the flames along its length, hissing as they lick the air. The elves nearest him falter, their courage wavering for the first time that night. Fingon feels it too, the weight of that presence, the dread that coils in his gut like a serpent. But he tightens his grip on his sword, his breath steady. This is why they crossed the ice. This is why they endured. Not for glory, not for vengeance, but for this moment. To stand between the darkness and the world and say, no further. Gothmog's laugh is the sound of cracking stone, of a mountain collapsing inward. Little king, he mocks, the words dripping with malice. You have led your people to their graves. Fingon does not answer with words. He answers with steel. From the writhing shadows they come, wolves, but not as the world has ever known them. Their eyes burn with a sickly inner fire, their breath a fog of poison that curls between dagger-like teeth. And at their head looms Karcharoth, the red maw, his massive frame bristling with unnatural strength, his every step leaving scorch marks upon the frozen earth. The elves who moments before had fought with the certainty of victory now hesitate. Their disciplined lines ripple like grass before a storm as the first wolves crash into them, fangs tearing through armor as though it were parchment. Fingelfin's voice cuts through the din, sharp as a blade. Hold the line, archers loose. A hail of arrows streaks through the gloom, finding their marks in throats and flanks, but the wolves do not stop. They do not even seem to feel the wounds. Carcharoth alone shrugs off 3 shafts, buried deep in his shoulder, his growl vibrating through the battlefield like distant thunder. He locks eyes with Fingon across the carnage, and in that moment, the prince understands. This is no mere beast. This is a weapon, crafted by Morgoth's own hand to break them. Fingon does not wait for the horror to take root. He moves before the thought is fully formed, his feet carrying him forward even as his mind races. Around him, warriors fall, their cries swallowed by the wolves' snarls. There is no time for strategy, no chance to regroup. If the line shatters now, all is lost. So he does the only thing he can. He raises his sword and charges straight into the heart of the pack. The world narrows to the flash of steel, the hot spray of blood, the deafening roar of his own pulse in his ears. He carves a path through the snarling tide, his blade a silver streak in the darkness. One wolf lunges, he sidesteps, driving his sword through its ribs. Another comes at his flank. He whirls, severing its spine with a single stroke. But Karcharoth is waiting. The great wolf circles, his lips peeled back in a mockery of a smile, venom dripping from his jaws to sizzle against the snow. Fingon tightens his grip. He knows the stories, how Morgoth fed this creature the very light of the valor, twisting him into something beyond nature. One bite, one scratch, and the poison will do the rest. But retreat is not an option, not when his people are dying, not when the fate of the Noldor hangs by a thread. So he stands firm, his breath steady, his eyes locked on the beast before him. The air crackles with tension, the battle around them fading into distant noise. And then, with a snarl that shakes the earth, Carcharoth leaps. Fingon's spear finds its mark, piercing deep into the heart of a great wolf with a wet crunch. The beast collapses, its final snarl fading into a whimper. But there's no time to savor the victory. Karcharoth's burning gaze locks onto him, those terrible eyes alight with something far too cunning for a mere beast. The air between them crackles, heavy with the scent of blood and smoke. Fingon shifts his stance, his grip tightening on his weapon, his breath coming steady despite the fire in his muscles. He knows the truth. No single elf, not even a prince of the Noldor, can stand against Morgoth's greatest creation. Yet his feet remain planted. To retreat now would mean abandoning his people to the slaughter, and that is a price he will never pay. Karcharoth circles, his massive paws leaving smoldering prints in the snow. His growl is low, taunting, as if he can taste Fingon's resolve, and finds it amusing. Then, without warning, the beast coils like a spring and lunges, his jaws gaping wide enough to swallow a man whole. Fingon barely raises his spear in time, the wooden shaft splintering as Karcharoth's teeth clamp down, venom dripping onto the prince's armored forearm with a hiss. The poison burns even through steel, searing like molten iron, but Fingon doesn't cry out. He twists, driving his dagger upward into the wolf's exposed throat. A horn blast splits the air, sharp and clear as breaking ice. The battlefield seems to hold its breath for a heartbeat before the thunder of hooves shakes the ground. Through the chaos rides Finglefin, his sword gleaming like a shard of the moon, his company of warriors crashing into the wolves like a tidal wave. Steel flashes, arrows sing, and for the first time since Carcharoth appeared, the tide of battle shifts. The great wolf snarls, distracted, his grip on Fingon's spear loosening just enough for the prince to wrench himself free. He stumbles back, his vision swimming, his arm aflame with pain, but alive. Fingelfin doesn't waste words. He barely spares his son a glance as he moves to stand beside him, his presence alone a shield against the darkness. Regroup, he commands, his voice cutting through the din. The line holds, but not for long. Fingon nods, his breath ragged, his mind already racing. The wolves may falter, but Karcharoth is far from finished, and somewhere beyond the smoke and slaughter, Gothmog still waits, his laughter echoing in the distance like the tolling of a funeral bell. The battle is far from won, but for now, the Noldor stand together, and that, perhaps, is enough. The Noldor fall back step by step, their ranks tightening like a coiled spring, shields interlocking with the precision of a craftsman's puzzle. Fingelfin's voice cuts through the din, each command a lifeline in the chaos. Spears forward, archers high arc. His words are iron, unyielding, and his warriors obey without hesitation. The wolves crash against their formation like waves against a cliff, snarling, snapping, but for now, the line holds. Yet every parry comes slower, every breath burns hotter. The elves are tireless, but not endless. Their armor is dented, their blades notched, and the relentless tide of Morgoth's horrors shows no sign of ebbing. Fingon feels it too, the slow, creeping weight of exhaustion dragging at his limbs. His sword arm trembles, the poison from Carcharoth's bite searing through his veins like liquid fire. He watches his father rally their faltering forces, the High King's banner still flying defiantly above the fray. But the truth is plain. They cannot win this battle through strength alone. Not here, not like this. Then, a flicker of movement in the corner of his vision. A gap in the enemy lines, thin as a knife's edge, where the wolves' frenzy has left their flanks exposed. Fingon's breath catches. It's not a path to victory. It's a path to something far more terrible. A diversion, a sacrifice. His gaze finds Fingelfin's across the bloodied snow, and in that heartbeat, no words are needed. The understanding between them is older than language, deeper than duty. A king must lead, a prince must act. Fingelfin's jaw tightens, his eyes flashing with something perilously close to grief. But he gives the barest nod. Fingon doesn't hesitate. He turns to the warriors nearest him, their faces streaked with ash and sweat. With me, he rasps, and though his voice is raw, it carries the weight of command. They follow without question, these few who would march into the maw of death itself for the chance to turn the tide. The charge is madness, it's brilliance. It's the only choice left. Fingon leads them straight into the wolves' weakened flank, his sword a streak of silver in the gloom. The beasts howl, turning from the main force to meet this new threat, their ranks thrown into disarray. For a moment, just a moment, the pressure on the Noldor's front line eases. Fingelfin seizes the opening like a drowning man, clutches a rope. Now, he roars, and the elves surge forward with the last of their strength, their blades carving through the confusion. The wolves falter. Karcharoth's snarl twists into something almost like uncertainty as his pack scatters, their coordination shattered. But Fingon pays no mind to the shifting tide. His vision tunnels to the task ahead, to the jagged ridge where Gothmog's silhouette looms against the smoke-choked sky. The Balrog hasn't moved. He's watching. Waiting, and Fingon intends to give him a show. Fingelfin's sword gleams like a sliver of captured lightning as he raises it high, his voice cutting through the clamor of battle. One last push, he cries, and the words are not just a command. They are a promise, a spark thrown into tinder. Around him, the Noldor rally, their weary limbs finding new strength, their voices weaving together into a song older than the sun. It's not a hymn of war, but of home, of Tyrion's golden streets, of the light they were forced to leave behind. The melody rises above the clash of steel, thin at first, then swelling like a wave, until even the wind seems to still in reverence. Karcharoth hesitates. The great wolf's ears twitch, his burning eyes narrowing as if the sound itself is a blade against his flesh. For the first time since he lunged from the shadows, something like uncertainty flickers across his monstrous face. He snarls, low and guttural, his massive paws scraping the frozen earth as he gathers himself to charge. Then, a new sound shatters the night. Not the howl of wolves, not the screams of the dying, but the clear, piercing call of horns. They echo from the east, bright and terrible, a sound that hasn't been heard in these lands since the Noldor first crossed the Helkaraxet. Every head turns. Every breath catches. Through the smoke and swirling snow rides a host clad in red and gold, their banners snapping like flames in the wind. At their forefront, a figure with hair like spilled blood, his armor scarred but gleaming, his sword already stained with the black blood of orcs. Medros, the name ripples through the Noldor ranks like a shock wave, half disbelief, half desperate hope. The sons of Fëanor have come. Carcharoth whirls, his growl deepening into something almost like panic. The wolves at his heels falter, their predatory confidence crumbling as the new threat closes in. Medros doesn't slow, he doesn't shout. He simply lifts his sword, and the host behind him moves as one. A crimson tide, crashing into Morgoth's forces with the fury of a storm long withheld. Finglefin doesn't waste the moment. His eyes meet Medros across the battlefield, and in that glance passes 1,000 unspoken things: betrayal, grief, the weight of centuries of silence. But also this, a shared purpose, a shared enemy. The past can wait. The war is now. With a roar that would shake the foundations of Angband itself, the High King of the Noldor charges forward, his people surging behind him like a river breaking free of its dam. The wolves scatter. Karcharoth howls, his voice raw with rage, but the tide has turned. The Balrogs, sensing the shift, retreat into the shadows, their flames guttering like dying candles. Gothmog's final snarl is lost in the thunder of hooves and the ringing of steel as the two hosts of the Noldor, once divided, now reunited in blood and battle, drive the enemy back into the darkness from whence they came. The field is theirs, the night is theirs, but as the first pale light of dawn creeps over the horizon, painting the snow in hues of gold and crimson, no one cheers. Not yet. The cost is too fresh, the wounds too deep. Finglefin kneels beside a fallen warrior, his hand resting on the elf's still chest, his head bowed. Medros watches from a distance, his expression unreadable. The battle of the Lamoth is over, but the war has only just begun. The horns of Medros' host still echo across the battlefield when the first wave of his riders crashes into the orc lines. Their swords are a blur of silver and crimson, their war cries sharp as the wind that howls through the Lamoth. These are not the weary, frostbitten warriors of Fingelfin's host. They are fresh, furious, their armor gleaming as if newly forged, their movements precise as a honed blade. Orcs scatter before them like leaves in a gale, their crude formations crumbling under the onslaught. For the first time in hours, the tide shifts decisively. A ragged cheer rises from Fingelfin's ranks. throats raw from shouting, voices hoarse with exhaustion and hope. But Medros does not join their celebration. He sits tall in his saddle, his face unreadable beneath the scars of Angband, his single hand gripping his sword with a tension that speaks louder than words. His eyes meet Fingelfin's across the carnage, and the weight of that glance is heavier than any blow struck this day. There is no warmth there, no kinship, only the cold acknowledgement of a debt paid, not a bond reforged. The air between them crackles with all that is unsaid. The ships burned at Losker, the ice crossed, the blood spilled on both sides of a feud that has festered for years beyond counting. Yet the battle rages on, and grudges must wait. The orcs, though broken, are not yet defeated. Balrogs still lurk in the smoke, their whip fire licking at the edges of the fray. Fingelfin gives the order to advance, his voice steady despite the ache in his bones, and his warriors follow without hesitation. To their left, Medros' forces move in perfect sync, cutting down the fleeing enemy with an efficiency that borders on brutality. Side by side, the two hosts fight not as allies, but as parallel storms, each raging against the same darkness without truly merging. A young warrior in Fingelfin's ranks dares to shout a greeting to one of Medros' riders, his voice bright with relief. The rider's only answer is a curt nod before he spurs his horse onward, leaving the elf standing frozen in the churned snow. The message is clear. This is not reconciliation. This is necessity. The silence between the hosts grows thicker with every step, every swing of a blade, until it feels like a living thing, coiled and waiting to strike. And then, a shift, a ripple through the enemy lines as the last of the orcs break, their retreat turning into a rout. The Balrogs vanish into the shadows, their flames guttering out like candles in the wind. The field falls eerily quiet, save for the moans of the wounded and the distant howl of the wind. The battle is won, but as Fingelfin turns to face Medros across the bloodied snow, he knows the true test is only beginning. The scars of the past are too deep, the wounds too fresh. The Noldor stand together today, but the chasm between them remains vast and dark as the Helkaraxet itself. Medros sheathes his sword. His expression is unreadable as he surveys the carnage, the bodies of friend and foe alike, half buried in the crimson-stained snow. When he speaks at last, his voice is low, measured, each word deliberate. The enemy will return, he says, not looking at Fingelfin, stronger, angrier. Fingelfin nods slowly. Then we must be ready. A pause. The wind carries the scent of iron and ashes between them. Medros turns to go, his warriors falling into step behind him without a word. But at the last moment, he hesitates, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for Fingelfin to see the flicker of something regret, resolve in his eyes. Then he is gone, his red cloak a fading stain against the pale dawn. The Noldor are victorious, but the silence left in Medros' wake is heavier than any defeat. The last of the orcs vanish into the jagged hills, their howls fading into the wind like the echoes of a nightmare. The battlefield lies still at last, the snow trampled into bloody slush, the air thick with the metallic tang of victory and loss. Fingelfin kneels beside a fallen warrior, his fingers brushing the elf's unseeing eyes closed. Around him, the survivors move in weary silence, tending wounds, gathering the dead, their faces hollow with exhaustion. The cost of this triumph is etched into every staggered breath, every blood-stained banner. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the frozen mire. Finglefin doesn't need to look up to know who approaches. The presence is unmistakable, a shadow shaped like a man, wrapped in the scent of smoke and old blood. Medros stops a spear's length away, his remaining hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Neither speaks. The silence between them is a living thing, coiled tight with all the words that have gone unsaid for centuries. The betrayal at Loskar, the ice, the years of silence, stretched thin as a blade's edge. It's Medros who breaks first. "You fought well," he says, his voice roughened by smoke and something darker. Not praise, not quite an apology, an acknowledgement, brittle as winter's first frost. Fingelfin rises, wiping his hands on his cloak. The motion is deliberate, slow, as if buying time to choose his next words with care. "As did you." His gaze flicks to the scarred ruin of Medros' wrist, the empty space where a hand once gripped a sword beside his. The question hangs unspoken. Why now? Why here? Medros follows his glance, his mouth twisting into something too bitter to call a smile. "The enemy doesn't care for our quarrels," he mutters. "Morgoth will grind us all to dust unless we stand together." A gust of wind howls through the pass, carrying the distant cries of fleeing orcs, the faint crackle of dying flames. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Karcharoth licks his wounds, and the Balrogs regroup in the depths of Angband. This isn't over. It's barely begun. Fingelfin exhales, his breath a pale ghost in the cold air. "Then let it be known," he says at last, "that the house of Fingelfin does not turn away allies in the face of darkness." The words are measured, careful. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a door left ajar. Medros studies him for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then, with a nod sharper than any blade, he turns on his heel. His warriors fall in behind him without a word, their red cloaks stark against the snow. They don't look back. Fingon steps to his father's side, his bandaged arm cradled close. "Do you trust him?" he asks quietly. Fingelfin watches the retreating figures until they vanish into the haze of the rising dawn. "I trust his hatred of Morgoth," he says finally. "For now, that will have to be enough." The wind shifts, carrying the scent of thawing earth, of distant springs yet untouched by war. The Noldor have won the field. But as the first rays of sunlight gild the peaks of the Erd-Wethrin, Fingelfin feels no triumph, only the weight of the long road ahead, and the shadows gathering just beyond the light. The battlefield falls into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the soft murmurs of healing spells and the occasional cry of a wounded elf. Fingon sits on a fallen shield, his breath shallow as a healer binds his poisoned arm with strips of clean linen soaked in Athelas. The herb's sharp, green scent cuts through the stench of blood and smoke, a small mercy. Around him, warriors exchange glances, some grateful, some wary, as Medros' host disappears into the east like a receding storm. Fingon knows what they are thinking. Why did he come? What does he want? The questions hang unspoken, heavier than the weight of his injuries. Fingelfin moves through the camp like a shadow given form, his footsteps deliberate, his voice steady as he kneels beside each fallen warrior. To one, he presses a hand to their brow, whispering words of comfort in Quenya, the language of home. To another, he offers a sip of water from his own flask, the simple act of balm greater than any magic. His people watch him with eyes full of devotion, but their king's face betrays nothing of the storm beneath. Medros' arrival has stirred old embers that could either warm them or burn everything they've built to ash. A young scout approaches, her hands trembling around a scrap of blackened banner torn from an orc standard. "My lord," she says, her voice thin with exhaustion. "They're regrouping in the foothills." Not just orcs, something else. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't need to. The dread in her eyes says enough. Morgoth's forces will return, and next time, they won't be so easily driven back. Finglefin takes the banner, running his thumb over the crude sigil of Angband. "Rest now," he tells her, his tone softer than the dawn light creeping over the mountains. "You've earned it." But as she bows and retreats, his gaze drifts eastward to where Medros vanished. The past is a chain around their necks, its links forged in fire and betrayal. Can they truly fight alongside the ones who abandoned them on the ice? Can trust be rebuilt when the foundation is cracked beyond repair? Fingon limps to his father's side, his jaw set against the pain. "We need them," he says quietly, following Fingelfin's gaze. "Not just their swords, their knowledge of the enemy." The High King doesn't answer at first. Above them, the stars shimmer cold and distant, their ancient light offering no counsel. Finally, he exhales, his breath a wisp of silver in the pre-dawn air. "Then we will tread carefully," he murmurs, like hunters in a wood full of traps. The camp stirs around them, the living tending to the dead, the wounded whispering prayers to the valor they no longer trust. Victory tastes like ashes today, but in the silence between father and son, something else takes root. Not hope, not yet, but the stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. Not here, not while they still draw breath. The wind carries the scent of damp earth and iron as Medros steps forward, his boots sinking slightly into the bloodied snow. His face is a mask, carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him, but his eyes burn with something sharper than the cold. "We cannot win this war divided," he says, his voice low enough that only Fingelfin can hear. The words hang between them, heavy with the weight of centuries. The last time they stood this close, it was on the shores of Araman, watching the ships burn. Fingelfin doesn't flinch. His fingers tighten imperceptibly around the hilt of his sword, not in threat, but in memory. The ice still lingers in his bones, the endless march, the whispers of his people as they wondered if they'd been left to die. And yet, here is Medros, speaking of unity. The irony tastes bitter, but the truth beneath it is undeniable. Morgoth cares nothing for their feuds. His shadow grows longer with every passing hour. Silence stretches, thin as a frayed rope. Somewhere behind them, a wounded horse whickers softly, the sound muffled by the snow. Fingelfin exhales, his breath a pale wisp in the dawn light. "You ask much," he says at last, not accusing, not forgiving, simply stating fact. Medros' jaw tenses. "I ask what is necessary." His gaze flickers to the east, where the peaks of Thangarodrim claw at the sky. "The enemy will not stop, not until every one of us is broken or buried." A child's laugh rings out suddenly, bright, incongruous from the makeshift healer's tents. Fingelfin turns toward the sound, his chest tightening. So many young faces among his people now, born on this side of the sea, who have never known the light of the trees. They deserve more than a future spent cowering before the gates of Angband. When he turns back, his hand is already outstretched, palm up, fingers uncurled. No fanfare, no grand speech, just an offer, simple and stark as the blade of a knife. Medros stares at it like he's never seen a hand before. His own missing one flexes unconsciously at his side, a phantom ache. For a heartbeat, the battlefield fades, and it's just the two of them, kin and traitor, king and outcast, bound by blood and betrayal. Then, with a sharp inhale, Medros reaches out. His grip is firm, calloused fingers pressing hard enough to bruise. Not an embrace, not absolution, but a promise, sealed in the only language either of them trusts anymore: action. The wind howls through the pass, scattering snow like ashes. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a wolf howls, its voice raw with hunger. The war is far from over. But for the first time, since the Noldor set foot in Beleriand, they are no longer fighting it alone. The fires crackle low in the gathering dark, their glow painting the faces of the Noldor in flickering gold and shadow. Two camps have become one, not by choice, but necessity. Their banners planted side by side in the churned earth. The air hums with quiet tension, the kind that lingers after a storm has passed, but before the next one gathers. Warriors huddle close, their voices hushed, their glances darting toward the other side, as if expecting blades to be drawn at any moment. Yet beneath the unease, something else stirs, the fragile, unspoken recognition that they share more than blood. They share scars. Fingon sits cross-legged beside a fire, his wounded arm resting across his knees as Maglar strums a quiet melody on his harp. The notes are tentative at first, like footsteps testing thin ice, but slowly they grow bolder. A song of Tyrion, of sunlit courtyards and laughter that once echoed through marble halls. Around them, Medros' brothers lean in, their postures loosening by degrees. Caranthir, ever the pragmatist, passes a wineskin to Fingon without a word. It's not an apology, it's not forgiveness, but it's something. Across the camp, an old warrior from Fingelfin's host recounts the crossing of the Helkaraxet to a group of wide-eyed young recruits. His voice trembles when he speaks of the ones who didn't make it, their names whispered like a prayer. Nearby, a red-cloaked elf from Medros' company listens, his face unreadable until he clears his throat and adds, "My brother fell there too." The admission hangs in the air, raw and unexpected. For a heartbeat, the divide between them feels thinner, but not all wounds yield so easily to time. In the deeper shadows, away from the firelight, figures move like ghosts. A hooded elf slips between the tents, his ears catching fragments of conversation, his eyes noting who stands where, who speaks to whom. Morgoth spies wear many faces, and suspicion is a poison that works slow and sure. A young healer tending to a wound pauses, her hands stilling as she overhears two warriors arguing in hushed tones. "They left us to die," one hisses, the other shakes his head, "and yet they came today." The night stretches on, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient dance. Fingon watches Medros from across the camp, the firelight carving hollows into his cousin's face. They haven't spoken since the handshake that sealed their uneasy truce. There's too much between them, too much hurt, too much history. But as the first hints of dawn tinge the horizon, Medros meets his gaze and gives the barest nod. It's not reconciliation, It's not trust, but it's a beginning. The first light of dawn paints the battlefield in shades of pale gold, revealing the full cost of the night's victory. The snow, once pristine, is now a patchwork of scarlet and mud, trampled beneath the boots of the living and the fallen alike. Scouts return with their breath still ragged from the run, their faces grim beneath their hoods. Morgoth's forces have retreated for now, but the news they bring is no comfort. Beyond the mountains, the Dark Lord's forges burn day and night, their smoke staining the northern sky. New horrors are being hammered into existence behind the walls of Angband, and the scouts' voices tremble as they speak of winged shadows circling the peaks, of earth shaking beneath the tread of something far larger than any Balrog. Finglefin stands at the edge of the camp, his cloak stirring in the cold wind. The weight of kingship presses heavier today than it did in the heat of battle. Behind him, his captains gather, some still wrapped in bloodied bandages, others with exhaustion etched deep into their faces. Among them, Medros stands apart, his presence like a smoldering ember in a room full of tinder. The tension is palpable. Last night's fragile alliance is too new, too raw, and the air hums with unspoken grievances. The debate begins quietly, then quickly sharpens into something fiercer. Angrod, his usual patience worn thin by loss, slams a fist onto the makeshift table. We strike now, before Morgoth can regroup. Every hour we delay, his strength grows. His voice cracks with the strain of grief. His youngest brother lies among the dead, his body not yet cold. But Caranthir shakes his head, his dark eyes flashing, and walks straight into another ambush. The passes are crawling with his spies. We need fortifications, alliances, alliances. Curufin's laugh is a bitter thing. With whom? The grey elves who scatter at the first sign of orcs, or perhaps the dwarves who care for nothing but their own halls. Medros says nothing. His gaze stays fixed on the map spread between them, his finger tracing the jagged line of the Erdwethrin. But when Fingelfin finally speaks, his voice cutting through the clamor like a blade through fog, it's to him the king turns first. You know the enemy's mind better than any here. What say you? The tent falls silent. All eyes turn to Medros, whose scars are a map of their own, each one a lesson carved into his flesh by Morgoth's cruelty. When he answers, his words are measured, each one deliberate. He wants us to rush in. He's counting on it. His finger taps the map, right over the black smudge marking Angband. But we're not just fighting his armies, we're fighting his patience, and that we can outlast. Fingelfin studies him for a long moment, then nods. The decision, when it comes, is not the roar of vengeance some had hoped for, nor the retreat others had feared. It's something quieter, something colder. We fortify the passes. We send envoys to every corner of Beleriand, and we wait. His gaze sweeps over the assembled lords, lingering last on Medros. Not because we are afraid, but because we choose the ground. When the next battle comes, it will be on our terms. A murmur ripples through the tent. Some nod, their fists clenched in resolve. Others exchange glances heavy with doubt, but no one dares to challenge the king's word, not when his eyes burn with the same fire that carried them across the Helkaraxet. As the council disperses, Fingelfin lingers, staring down at the map as if it holds secrets only he can see. Outside, The wind carries the sound of hammers ringing against stone as the first fortifications rise. The war is far from over, but for the first time since the Noldor set foot in this land, they are no longer merely reacting to Morgoth's moves. They are playing the long game. And the Dark Lord, for all his power, has never faced an enemy who refused to break. The morning sun climbs higher over the battlefield, its weak light glinting off the axes and chisels already biting into the stone. Finglefin stands atop a newly laid foundation, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, his palms raw from the work. Around him, the Noldor move like a single organism, hauling timber, mixing mortar, their voices weaving together in the same rhythmic chants that once raised the towers of Tirion. There's no distinction now between Fingelfin's people and Medros's. Sweat and calluses are the great equalizers. Even the proudest lords have traded their embroidered cloaks for work tunics, their swords for mallets. Only Medros lingers at the edge of the sight, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the northern horizon, where the peaks of Thangorodrim loom like rotten teeth. A young mason pauses to wipe his brow, squinting at the half-finished wall. It won't be like Tirion, he murmurs to the elf beside him, his voice thick with something between regret and resolve. His companion shakes her head, trowel flashing in the light. No, it'll be stronger. Fingelfin hears them. He hears all of it. The quiet doubts, the stubborn hopes, the way the wind carries echoes of old quarrels, even as new stones are set into place. He steps down from the foundation, his boots kicking up pale dust, and joins Medros at the overlook. For a long moment, neither speaks. Below them, the land stretches raw and wounded, scarred by the battle, yet already greening at the edges where the snow has melted. Spring is coming, whether Morgoth wills it or not. They call it Barad Ethel, Fingelfin says at last, nodding toward the rising fortress, Tower of the Well. His voice is calm, but his eyes are sharp as flint. A place to stand, a place to watch. Medros' jaw tightens. He says nothing, but the tension in his shoulders speaks volumes. Every stone laid feels like a delay to him. Every hour spent building a betrayal of the oath that gnaws at his bones. Yet when he finally turns, his gaze sweeps over the workers, over Fingon, hauling a sled of quarried rock, over Maglor distracting the weary with songs of home, and something in his expression shifts. Not surrender, not yet, but a reluctant acknowledgement. You're playing the long game, he mutters. Fingelfin's smile is thin, humorless. We cross the Helkaraxet, kinsman. Patience is the one weapon Morgoth cannot break. A shout rises from the western slope, scouts returning, their arms laden with fresh-cut timber. The sound seems to shake Medros from his thoughts. With a final glance at the distant mountains, he strides toward the commotion, his red cloak snapping behind him. He doesn't join the laborers, not yet. But he doesn't leave either, and so the walls grow taller, stone by stubborn stone, not the gleaming marble of Valinor, but something harder, rougher, forged in exile, tempered by loss. As the sun dips below the peaks, the first torches are lit along the battlements, their flames tiny but defiant against the gathering dark. No one speaks of forgiveness. No one speaks of trust. But when Fingon passes a water skin to Medros without a word, and Medros drinks without hesitation, the silence between them feels less like a wound and more like a scar. The fortress will stand, the watch will be kept, and somewhere in the space between hammer strikes and whispered plans, a fragile thing takes root, not the alliance they once had, but the shadow of what might yet be. Days blur into weeks, and the rhythm of the forge and the training yard becomes as steady as a heartbeat. The clash of swords rings out from dawn till dusk, the sound no longer a herald of division, but of discipline. Fingon and Maedhros move through their drills with a synchronicity that surprises even their most seasoned warriors, parrying, striking, pivoting as if their bodies share a single thought. The old rivalry between them hasn't vanished, not entirely, but it's been tempered into something leaner, sharper. A nod here, a muttered correction there, the occasional grudging laugh when one of them stumbles. It's not friendship, not yet, but it's respect, hard-won and unspoken, forged in the heat of shared purpose. Finglefin watches from the shadows of the armory, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The sight of his son and his nephew, training side by side, sends a quiet warmth through his chest, though he dare not show it. Pride is a luxury kings can ill afford, not when every decision carries the weight of thousands. He turns away before they notice him, his boots crunching on the gravel as he strides toward the eastern wall. The fortress grows taller by the day, its ramparts rising like the bones of some great beast pushing up through the earth. Barad Ethel is no Tyrion. Its beauty is in its strength, in the way its stones grip the mountain, as if refusing to be shaken loose. Night falls softly, the stars emerging one by one like watchful eyes. Fingelfin climbs the unfinished steps to the highest battlement, the wind tugging at his cloak. Below him, the camp hums with activity, fires flickering, voices murmuring, the occasional burst of song from Maglar's harp. But his gaze drifts north, where the horizon crouches beneath the shadow of Thangarodrim. The air is clear tonight, too clear, and he can almost see the distant glow of Morgoth's forges staining the sky. The enemy is not idle. He's weaving new terrors in the dark, sharpening his claws for the next strike. A footstep behind him. Fingon joins him at the wall, his face still flushed from training, his breath steadying. For a moment, neither speaks. Then, quietly, "Do you think he's watching us too?" Fingelfin doesn't need to ask who he is. The answer sits heavy in the silence between them. "Always," he says at last. His hand grips the rough stone of the parapet, the edge biting into his palm. "But let him look, let him see what we've built." Fingon exhales, his breath a pale wisp in the starlight, and when he comes, the wind shifts, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, a sound too familiar now to stir fear. Fingelfin's voice, when it comes, is quiet but unshaken. Then we'll remind him why the Noldor crossed the ice. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent to the hopes and fears of elves and dark lords alike. But in the space between heartbeats, Fingelfin makes a vow, not to the valor who turned away, nor to his people who depend on him, but to himself. He will not be the king who led them to ruin. He will be the blade that meets the darkness and the shield that holds it back. Below, the fires burn on, the fortress stands, and the watch continues. A rider crests the ridge at dusk, his horse lathered and heaving, the last light of the sun catching the silver thread of his cloak. The sentries tense, hands flying to sword hilts, until they recognize the sigil on his banner. Not an enemy, not a scout, a messenger from Círdan the shipwright, his face gaunt from hard riding, but his eyes alight with something none of them have seen in years, urgency edged with hope. Finglefin meets him in the torchlit courtyard, the wind carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The messenger drops to one knee, his voice rough but clear as he delivers his tidings. The words ripple outward like a stone cast into still water. Ulmo has spoken, the valor have not forgotten, the sea longing in their hearts, the grief for lost Ammon, the ache of abandonment. None of it was in vain. Help is coming, not today, not tomorrow, but someday. A murmur sweeps through the gathered elves, a sound like the first thaw of spring cracking winter's grip. Fingon grips his father's arm, his face transformed. Even Medros, standing apart as always, goes very still, his gaze fixed on the western horizon, as if he could see all the way to the shores of Balrog. Fingelfin raises a hand, and the murmurs cease. "This is hope," he says, his voice carrying the weight of command and something softer beneath it. But hope is not a shield. Morgoth's shadow lengthens while we wait. His eyes sweep over them, the warriors with their notched swords, the healers with their herb-stained hands, the young ones who have never known anything but war. Our strength was never in the valor's promise. It is in the hands that lift each other up, the backs that bear the same burdens, the voices that say, "Not here, not today." That night, the great hall echoes with laughter for the first time in memory. The feast is meager hard bread, thin wine, venison hunted from the edges of Morgoth's poisoned woods, but no one tastes the lack. Maglar's harp weaves through the noise, his fingers pulling forth a melody none have heard since Tyrion's fall, bright and defiant as a sword thrust into the dark. Someone begins to sing, then another, then 100 more, their voices rising like a challenge to the stars. In a corner, a young elf who'd been a child on the ice turns to her brother. "Do you think," she starts, then falters, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. He understands. They all do. For years they've fought to survive. Tonight, for the first time, they dare to think beyond survival. To victory, to home. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the scent of salt from distant shores. The watchfires burn on, and in the east, the darkness stirs. The last notes of Maglar's harp linger in the air like fireflies, fading into the warm hum of voices and laughter. The hall glows with torchlight, its rough-hewn walls softened by the shadows of shared joy. For a moment, just a moment, it almost feels like Tyrion again, like home. Then the night shatters. A horn blast rips through the peace, sharp as a dagger's edge, followed by the distant, guttural roar of war drums. Every head snaps toward the sound, every breath stills. Fingelfin's chair scrapes back before the echo fades. His eyes lock with Medros across the hall, and in that heartbeat, a lifetime of unspoken words passes between them. No hesitation, no debate, only the silent understanding of warriors who have stared into the same abyss. They move as one, blades already in hand, their voices rising above the sudden chaos. To arms, Fingelfin bellows, his command cutting through the din like a beacon. Bar the gates, archers to the walls. Outside, the world has turned to madness. Torches flare along the eastern ridge, not dozens but hundreds, no, thousands. Their flickering light revealing a sea of iron and snarling faces. Morgoth's legions stretch farther than the eye can see, their ranks swollen with fresh horrors, twisted creatures with too many limbs, wolves larger than horses, and at their center, a crimson tide of fire Balrogs, their whips coiling like serpents in the night air. And leading them all, Karcharoth, his maw dripping venom, his eyes burning with the promise of slaughter. The Noldor don't cower, they don't falter. They form up with a precision born of desperation and hard-won trust. Fingelfin's silver-clad warriors slotting seamlessly beside Medros' scarred veterans. Shields clash together, creating a wall of steel. Bows creak as arrows notch. Fingon, his healed arm steady now, leaps onto the battlement, his sword raised high. For Middle-earth, he cries, and the response is thunderous, a roar that shakes the very stones of Barad Ethel. Then the enemy hits. The first wave crashes against the gates like a storm surge, their crude ladders slamming against the walls. Arrows darken the sky, finding throats, eyes, the gaps in rusted armor. But the Noldor hold. They hold. Fingelfin and Maedhros fight shoulder to shoulder, their blades a whirl of silver and crimson, their movements so synchronized it's as if they share one mind. Where the High King strikes with the measured fury of a glacier, Medros is wild, fire unpredictable, relentless, his single hand wielding his sword with a grace that belies its brutal efficiency. Carcharoth howls, his voice a sound to curdle blood, and charges straight for Fingon. The prince stands his ground, his spear leveled, his breath steady. The wolf's charge shakes the earth, his jaws gaping wide enough to swallow a man whole, but Fingon sidesteps at the last second, driving his spear deep into the beast's flank. Karcharoth screams, twisting, his claws raking the air. Then Medros is there, his sword flashing down an arc that severs tendon and bone. The great wolf stumbles, his legs buckling, his venom spilling onto the stones like acid. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seems to freeze. Carcharoth, the Red Maw, Morgoth's most feared hunter, collapses with a whimper that's almost pitiful. Then the tide turns, the orcs waver, their snarls fading into panicked shouts. The Balrogs hesitate, their fire dimming, and the Noldor, sensing the shift, surge forward with a cry that could split the sky. The enemy breaks. They flee like leaves before a gale, their formations dissolving into chaos, their terror palpable. The Noldor let them go. There's no joy in the slaughter, only the grim satisfaction of survival. As the last echoes of battle fade, Fingelfin lowers his sword, his chest heaving. Medros wipes his blade clean on a fallen banner, his expression unreadable. Dawn creeps over the horizon, painting the battlefield in hues of gold and crimson. The fortress still stands, the watchfires still burn, and for the first time in an age, the Noldor know what it is to fight, and win as one. The first light of dawn spills over the battlefield like molten gold, painting the scarred earth and the weary faces of the Noldor in its gentle glow. Fingelfin stands atop the bloodied ramparts of Barad Ethel, his sword still clutched in his hand, its edge dulled from the night's labor. Below him, his people move slowly, binding wounds, gathering the fallen, their voices hushed but not broken. The air smells of smoke and iron, of sweat and damp earth, but beneath it all, there's something else. The faint, stubborn scent of pine needles crushed underfoot, of new growth pushing through the cracks in the world. Victory, it's a heavier thing than he expected. Not the bright, triumphant rush of song, but a quiet, hard-won stillness, the kind that settles into your bones and reminds you of the cost. He turns his gaze eastward, where the peaks of Thangarodrim loom like a festering wound against the sky. Morgoth is wounded, not slain. This battle is won, but the war stretches ahead, long and dark as the Helkaraxet. Yet as Finglefin looks upon his people, upon Fingon, directing the healers, upon Medros kneeling beside a fallen comrade, upon the young ones who have never known peace but still dare to laugh, something kindles in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but the ember of it, waiting to be fanned. A hand touches his shoulder. Fingon, his face streaked with soot and blood, offers him a water skin. Drink, he says, and the word is simple, but the meaning beneath it is vast. You're still here. We're still here. Finglefin takes it, the water cool against his throat, and for a moment he closes his eyes. When he opens them again, the horizon is brighter, the shadows retreating like reluctant specters. Down in the courtyard, Maglar's harp begins a new song, soft at first, then swelling as others join in. It's not a dirge for the dead, nor a paean to victory. It's something rarer, a song of the morning, of light returning, of hands clasped in the dark. The melody winds through the fortress, stitching together the frayed edges of their spirits. Even Medros pauses in his work, his head tilting slightly, as if catching a scent on the wind. Finglefin raises his sword, not in challenge, but in salute. The steel catches the dawn, flashing like a promise. No grand speech leaves his lips. No oath needs to be spoken aloud. The Noldor know. They've crossed ice and fire to stand here, and stand they will until the last star fades, until the last breath leaves their lungs. The tale of this night will be sung for ages, in halls of stone and under open skies. But for now, in this fragile dawn, there is only this: a people unbroken, a fortress standing, and a king who lifts his face to the light and finds it enough.